It's that class that he teaches basics of Marxism, man. That's you won't get anything like that literally anywhere unless you perhaps go to China and sign up for their Marxism schools. But it's incredibly important. And as we were just discussing, there's a very fundamental difference between us getting correct opinions on things and various events, and then us having the world view that allows us, that gives us the confidence to be right when new events arise, similar as to the ones that we've been constantly seeing and discussing. But I have a very secret guest for our next discussion. We're going to be talking about some of the very ridiculous propaganda that is being said about the DPRK now, literally in your face, turning reality upside down. So very clear example of bourgeois ideology, false consciousness, the turning of reality upside down. We'll also be discussing some other stories out of Palestine, recent former Hamas hostages who have came out saying that they feared more the Israeli bombs than they did Hamas, of course, especially since it's been clear since October 7th that Israel extended its Hannibal directive to including civilians, not just soldiers that they'll kill if they're caught by enemies, but civilians as well. So these hostages were definitely correct in having that fear, because a good chunk of the civilians killed on October 7th were by the hands of Israeli tanks and helicopters and IDF soldiers. And we'll discuss also other stories concerning Palestine. And yes, it's the Secret Santa of the Midwestern Marx Institute. We're going to be bringing him now in a couple seconds, just waiting for him to for them to reappear on the camera. Okay, I've been told that I need to keep it going keep the build up on for. Oh, he's ready to go. So here is the secret guest, the legendary Eddie Liger Smith. How you doing, brother?
Good. Glad to be with you today.
Absolutely glad to have you on. I've missed you, man. It's been, I think, it hasn't ever been this long a period where our YouTube watchers haven't seen you.
I know, bro. It's been crazy. I've just been trying to do the TikToks when I can, but it's literally I have to wrestle twice a day and then usually run 2 practices a day. So that's like 8 hours of wrestling, and then got the US Open coming up in 2 weeks, and then hopefully I'll be free to do more YouTube content. But yeah, I'm glad I got to hop on tonight.
Absolutely. So I wanted to first go to a story coming out of the DPRK. Well, the story is itself coming out of, I believe, France. But it says, North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un crying like a baby. They always have to throw that in. It's kind of like Trump. Al-Baghdadi, he died like a dog. Crying like a baby. While addressing an audience of women during an event at the headquarters of the Communist Party, he was asking the women to have more kids for the good of the party, the revolution, and the country. So this story has been painted by the tabloid propagandists as Kim Jong-un crying in the process of asking women, please have more babies, like some former, pathetic simp thing. And here's a little bit of the clip.
보고자는 이렇듯 고결한 인생관을 지닌 여성들의 대호가 나날이 늘어나.
So obviously, none of us speak the language, so it wouldn't make much sense to keep it rolling much longer. But here's an actual contextualizing comment from Comrade Stu. Kim was crying because another person, a woman, as you can clearly see in the audience, and there's a lot of them crying as well, most of them are crying, was giving a detailed account of the treatment of women under Japanese occupation of Korea, particularly in the Second World War period. So again, literally turning reality on its head, making it seem as this horrible dictator was forcing women to have children. The population is going down, and he's crying because he's forced to do something horrible. And he's actually crying because he's a deeply empathetic person who actually gives a shit about the crimes that were done to his people, and especially to the women, the crimes that were waged on women by the Japanese imperialists. So the people of the DPRK are amongst the most dehumanized by imperialist propaganda, and this is another example of it. But Eddie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And that Visegrad 24 account, I don't know. It'd be interesting to track the origins of that and see how they emerged. But I first became aware of them during the Russia-Ukraine war, and they were one of the biggest accounts pushing Ukrainian propaganda, NATO propaganda, anti-Russia propaganda. And then as soon as the conflict in Palestine breaks out, they immediately side with Israel, which is interesting. It's just a sign, that the imperialist forces, or the biggest imperialist forces in the world, side with the Nazi fascist government in Ukraine and with the fascist ethno state that is Israel. But yeah, and then of course it's not surprising to see the same account spreading lies and nonsense about the DPRK. We see that the forces of imperialism are united against Palestine, against the DPRK, against Russia, against these countries who are fighting back against U.S. global political dominance and economic dominance. Um, so yeah, interesting. And that comrade Stu, he does a good job of debunking a lot of anti-communist myths on Twitter.
Absolutely. And Eddie, you've done a lot of good work going into uh, the specificities of how it is that the propaganda apparatuses are created and dispense some of these ridiculous stories that come out about North Korea, the People's Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And we have other videos that we can point the audience to so that they can get that in-depth analysis concerning how Juche necromancy and other similar phenomenons work. But I wanted to hop on to our next segment. This is, last Sunday, the last alone stream that I did, I covered how the Hamas hostages were speaking about the treatment of Hamas. And, there was a lady who was saying that they treated my daughter like a queen, and who ended up condemning the bombing of Gaza and the treatment of the Palestinians by the Israeli apartheid occupational force. There was someone else who explicitly said that she did not want to meet with Netanyahu and that she condemned what's going on in Gaza. And the vast majority of the people that were held hostage have not been allowed to go in front of a camera. So this was something that was predicted. A lot of these people grew up with a caricature image of what the Palestinians were and what Hamas was. They're being compared to ISIS, to the Nazis. And when they see the humanity of people guided by the principles of Islam, which, a lot of them overlap with some of our social principles and ethics as Marxists, it breaks down that ideological barrier, that dehumanization that has been central for the Israeli state getting consent from its people. So here's another example of that. And surprise, surprise, it's coming out on CNN, but let's listen into what they're saying.
Tonight, CNN has learned that former Hamas hostages had a contentious with Israeli officials today. One of them telling the Israeli security cabinet, quote, "What I see on TV scares me a lot. I see Israeli bombings there, and you have no idea where the captives are. I was in a house surrounded by explosions. We slept in the tunnels, and we feared not Hamas, but that Israel might kill us, and then it would have been Hamas killed you."
Even on CNN, huh?
Even on CNN.
Remember, dude, in the debate with Destiny, he said the only sources saying that Israel killed their own civilians or fired on their own civilians were from TikTok and Twitter. Now it's even mainstream sources. Can't deny that.
Well, yeah, the reports have shown that what basically is going on is that the Hannibal Directive that Israel has had for decades, which says that when their soldiers are captured by the enemy, they have the right to carry forth the operation against the enemy, even if it means killing their own soldiers. It's been extended to civilians. And that's, I think, very clearly what we've seen, not just in October 7th, but what these people have feared when they've been held hostage, that the bombs are going to land on them. They end up fearing not the people who they have just removed the dehumanization that they were socialized into, but the bombs of their own government, the government that they were raised to love and admire. I wanted to perhaps go to another segment, but Eddie, you had also planned on speaking a little bit about the history of labor Zionism. I know it's getting late, and you've had a few practices today. So, would you be interested in telling the audience a bit about what labor Zionism is? It's a topic that I don't think we've ever covered on stream. I know we've published some articles on it, but what is labor Zionism, and what role does it play today in certain iterations or attempts to defend Israel from a pseudo-progressive standpoint?
Yeah, it's a really important concept to understand for us as communists and socialists, because there are people who will describe Israel today as, socialist or communist, and that's been a thing since since Zionism became a thing in the late 1800s. There have always been these labor Zionists who say that we need to colonize Palestine not through violence, but through labor and through developing the land. But of course, at the end of the day, they still support the founding of the Jewish state, which says in its founding documents that it supports a Jewish majority. And the founding of that state takes place on top of Palestine, where there's an Arab majority. So there's this contradiction there that the labor Zionists can't get around, where in order to found the state of Israel, which they support at the end of the day, albeit with all this rhetoric about not being for, expelling Palestinians, they're for this state that creates a Jewish majority. So in practice, they end up participating in and supporting all these mass expellings, compulsory expulsion of Palestinians, and the demolition of homes. They just, sometimes criticize it, sometimes dress it up with progressive rhetoric, sometimes buy into these myths and lies that every Israeli war of expansion or Israeli settlement was done in self-defense or was created in self-defense. And I recommend people who want to learn about these myths and get a really foundational understanding of the conflict, check out Norman Finkelstein's Image and Reality of the Israel-Palestine Conflict, which goes through what's actually the real history of Israel, their founding and their expansion, versus the Zionist history that's often given. And he focuses on labor Zionism pretty heavily, and how at the end of the day, labor Zionists support the founding of an ethno-state. So they can't get around, being in favor of violence and apartheid. And, of course, I believe it was Ingalls who said people can't be free while they're oppressing another people. You can't have a socialist state that's a neo-colonial outpost of the U.S. committing a genocide. That's not socialism. That's ethno-nationalism, because the Palestinian Arabs are not having their material needs met, and in fact, it's quite the opposite. So I actually did a TikTok here to try and illustrate this point through like a skit. I just whipped this up like 6 minutes before practice and kind of rushed it, so it's not my best work, but hopefully it'll help illustrate the point I'm trying to make here. And of course, people should read this book if they want a more in-depth understanding of what labor Zionists actually argue and the kind of massacres and mass expulsions of Palestinians that they've supported in practice.
I am a Zionist. What does that mean? I think that the Jewish people should have their own state, which should be founded in Palestine. Okay, what is your state gonna be like? Well, our Jewish state needs to have a Jewish majority, so we'll allow Jews from anywhere in the world to come to our state and gain citizenship. Wait, a Jewish majority, but there's already an Arab majority in Palestine. So how are you going to change that? The Palestinians will probably just get up and leave and let us have their land.
So that was one of the major myths of the labor Zionists, especially before the 1948 partition and the Nakba. But even since then, they say, the Palestinians will just get up and leave, or they'll let us have the land. And obviously that has not been the case. And a lot of times they'll say things like that, and then more extremist groups like the Irgun and these more explicitly ethno-nationalist and fascistic Zionist groups will commit the murders and demolish the homes, and the labor Zionists will look the other way, and then they'll just go and settle there. They'll be like, oh, whatever, it happened, what can we do? Might as well, put push for economic development and socialism in this region after we just ethnically cleansed the Arabs who were living there.
Land. And if they don't, then what do you mean? What are you going to do to the Palestinians if they don't just leave and give you their land? We're just going to make a move. Oh, yeah, you're just going to make them move? How are you going to do that? Well, you know, there are some Zionists, not me, I'm not one of these, who want to kill or expel the Arabs to force them out. Oh, yeah, but you don't support that, right? No, I'm a labor Zionist, so I just support founding the Israeli state with a Jewish majority. How do you create a Jewish majority when there's already an Arab majority without using force and violence? Well, the thing is, you saying that is just highly anti-Semitic. What you're saying is that you want to create an ethno-state on top of Palestine. More anti-Semitism. I am a Zionist. What does that mean?
Yeah, so that's basically it. They'll deny or claim to not support the worst crimes of Israel, but at the same time support the founding of Israel, which could only be done through the mass expelling of Palestinians.
Yeah, and we're seeing the resurfacing of ideas, not just like labor Zionism, but others that are trying to paint Israel in somehow a progressive light, because they've lost the youth. You know, the youth is looking at a futureless future, and they're seeing their government send billions of dollars to fund the genocide. And who the hell is going to support that when they're seeing on their phone the reality of Palestinian deaths? You know, almost 9,000 Palestinians have been killed. Palestinian children have been killed in less than 60 days. The rate at which children are being killed is higher than that at which they were being killed during the Nazi Holocaust. So what person that aligns their interests and their political opinions with humanity, with the people, is ever going to be in favor of the Israeli occupational apartheid state?
Yes, great points. And that last video that we showed was me kind of mocking what the labor Zionists were up to in 1948, claiming to be socialists while supporting the founding of an ethno-state on top of Palestine. But I did a video a while back, and this was actually months and months ago, that kind of shows what labor Zionists are up to nowadays and the kind of propaganda they push about Israel nowadays, and trying to make it seem like
has never
fantastic progressive place.
worked except in this place.
He said communism has never worked except in this place. They go, welcome to Israel.
You've got to be kidding me. These guys are repackaging
Oh man, I hate
Zionism, trying to make it appear progressive and then selling it to you on TikTok. Come be a settler in communist Israel, where we share all the houses after we force the Palestinians out of them. Communism is when we shoot missiles at places where children are playing, apparently. And this is a common tactic of Zionists when they're trying to sell apartheid and settler colonialism to Westerners who have bankrolled it forever. The U.S. gives Israel at least $3 billion a year. They've also talked about things like intersectional Zionism or labor Zionism, as if a settler colonial project forcing people off their homes and enforcing an apartheid could be progressive or even communist. What an absolute joke, dude. Free Palestine.
Oh my God, the Matrix messing with us there.
Yeah,
With the video production. But yeah, I mean, I don't see people falling for it. The information war has very clearly been lost by the Zionists, and the propaganda has gotten extremely bad. And we covered it earlier, but Lloyd Austin mentioned it earlier this week that Israel's losing the strategic war. We have UN officials coming out and appealing to the 99th article of the UN in order for us to receive a ceasefire. So not only is the global majority on the side of Palestine, but the leaders of the imperialist powers are having to realize that, at some point, you can't continue with a funding of a genocide that your people overwhelmingly are against. But Eddie, how do you see this playing out in the future? These contradictions being so apparent.
between you mean with between labor Zionism as an idea and the state of Israel?
Well, with the the fact that the global majority has currently shown itself to be against the ongoing genocide of the Palestinians. There's a lot of pressure, or not a lot of pressure, but statements that weren't being made 50 something days ago by Western leaders that are being made now. How much longer do you think a process like this, a genocidal process like this, can keep going?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. A lot of people I've heard speculating that this could be the end of Israel because they are losing the propaganda war so bad. And I mean, anyone who's been following Israeli internal politics at all knows that there's been this like rightward shift. And of course, as we just described, all Zionism is right wing. You know, the progressive or labor Zionism is just a mask for murderous settler colonialism and apartheid. But with time, the more openly fascistic elements of Israeli politics have taken control of the state. And Netanyahu is not well loved within Israel. He's been charged with corruption and is largely unpopular. So, in order to stay in power, he's formed a coalition with the likes of Naftali Bennett and these people who are just, gleefully cheering on collective punishment of people in Gaza, including civilians and children. So these are the kind of the people who are now in charge of the Israeli government. And as I'm reading this book and reading about, say, the policy of the U.S. under Ronald Reagan towards Israel versus what Joe Biden's policy is, the U.S. would often scold Israel if they got too aggressive, right? And Israel was always aggressive and expansionist, but not always as brazen as they are today. So that's only going to turn public opinion against them more. They look more and more like this rogue fascistic state, just openly committing a genocide. But what mechanisms are there to intervene? International law under global capitalism is a joke. There's no way to punish Israel so long as they have the backing of the United States, which literally has been a Zionist strategy from day one. From day one, the intelligent Zionists leading the project said, we need the backing of a great power. We need the backing of the United Kingdom or the U.S. So they make themselves useful to the U.S. by protecting their economic and political interests in the region. They lobby the U.S. through lobbies like AIPAC, but that's not the only reason that the U.S. supports Israel. Their interests are aligned in general. So Israel is then propped up by the U.S., which makes it difficult to punish them or sanction them or do anything. So, public opinion is going to continue to turn against them, but will that lead to the genocide being stopped? I don't know.
Yeah, all fair points, brother. It's I guess we'll see. We'll see. Something's going to have to happen within the coming weeks. I think most geopolitical analysts are saying that there's no way that this could keep going for much longer. But we know the extremes that imperialism is willing to go to in order to achieve its ends. I have a couple more stories to go through. We'll be covering them together. I wanted to first thank Battle Cossacks, the comrade from Argentina. Alejandro Caldevenos from the Korean Friendship Association of Spain has been arrested by the FBI for allegedly aiding the DPRK. I did see that. I shared some of the posts from our comrades in various parties who have been in close contact with Alejandro Cao. He's someone who I used to watch his videos when I was first learning about the DPRK. And it's very sad to see. And if there's any way that we can show any more solidarity with the comrade, we will do that. And for the next stream plan, I will have a story on Alejandro Gao and hopefully someone who can come and talk to us about specifically what happened and why he's being persecuted. But the next story I wanted to discuss, and perhaps I can wait for Eddie to come in, but one of the things that has boiled my blood the most since October 7th, basically, has been the liberals who, in times of in times of relative peace, because I don't know how you call peace the situation that the West Bank and Gaza are under, but in times pre explicit, open, intensified genocide, they they pay lip service to a support for the Palestinian plight. But then when a people that are pushed into conditions akin to a concentration camp, a people that are colonized, that are occupied, that are blockaded, unlike any other country in the world, when people like this break out after peaceful struggles have completely failed, you have so-called socialists condemn them for not participating in mass demonstration or democratic politics, as Megan Day, the editor for Jacobin, did. We had a segment covering the futility of that, and there's been many others. And a couple of days after October 7th, I wrote an article precisely criticizing this phenomenon. And one of the things that I constantly reiterate is the fact that none of these people who today are trying to play this bullshit, nuanced, both sidesism game, condemn Hamas on one side and on the other side, condemn Israel, what positions would they have against a Nat Turner rebellion? What positions would they have against an Algerian anti-colonial struggle? What positions would they have against South Africa's struggle against apartheid? What side would they be on? So one of the things that I wanted to show was precisely how a figure like Nelson Mandela, universally admired and recognized to be a hero of the struggle against apartheid, how he thought of Palestinian resistance and mentioned that just like in his struggle, it is never the oppressed that come to violence first. The oppressed are left with only one option, and when that one option is violence, that's when they take that option, and they're right to take it, because nothing beats the struggle for freedom, the struggle against occupation, the struggle against colonialism. So let's hear it in Mandela's words themselves, and let's think about these people that are condemning Palestine for the route that they've been forced to take with Hamas in order to struggle for their freedom. Wouldn't they also be condemning people like Mandela? And then let's reflect. Are these so-called democratic socialists, these petty bourgeois middle-class moralists, are they actually as on the right side of history, as morally as they think they are? Or is it the complete opposite, that they're attempting to be neutral on a moving train, something you cannot do, as Howard Zinn correctly taught us? But let's listen in on Mandela.
Choose peace rather than confrontation, except in cases where we cannot proceed, where we cannot move forward. Then, if the only alternative is violence, we will use violence.
So the same part of the wall that the Al-Aqsa flood broke through was a place that was the destination of these large peace marches in 2018, 2019, where hundreds of thousands of people were injured, hundreds died because of Israeli snipers. So when you have a peace march and they literally shoot you and kill you and injure thousands of you, what other alternative do you have in a situation where you don't have clean water? They limit your access to food. You can't escape. It's been literally described by leading Israeli officials themselves as a concentration camp, as an open air prison by Human Rights Watch and other international organizations. So what other alternative would you have than violent struggle? But here come the Western liberal moralists to condemn Hamas and supposedly Israel at the same time. But Eddie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was writing this week about anti-imperialism in hindsight, and this is just such a good example. Nelson Mandela is a good example, and the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. Nat Turner is a good example. There are other ones like John Brown, who nowadays a lot of people pretend like are their heroes, and openly express support for these anti-colonial or anti-slavery revolts and struggles, even though civilians were killed in a lot of them. And it's so easy to do that years later. Years later, when we have when we can look back in hindsight and see that it was a struggle against an oppressive system, and it was violence, that was the last recourse, the last resort. And in a lot of cases, like with the American Civil War, it was ultimately violence that was needed to bring an end to the system of slavery. So there are so many people who do that, but then they condemn the Palestinians and they condemn Hamas and they condemn any liberatory group taking up arms to struggle against oppression or apartheid or colonization. And it's so useless, because it's like, we need you to stand up for these people when they're fighting their struggle, when the propagandists are trying to demonize these people and turn people against them. That's when we need you to stand up for the people fighting the anti-colonial struggle. We don't need you to stand up for Nat Turner 200 years later. Slavery's already over, right? That doesn't take any courage. We've already had the benefit of history to teach us that slavery was an evil, oppressive, hyper exploitative system that needed to come to an end, and justified violence from the perspective of the slaves. So who were being systematically deprived of their freedom. So it's this lack of structural analysis, though. People just get swept up in the propaganda. And that's why, the point of my planned pamphlet or article or whatever on anti-imperialism and hindsight is to say, have a theoretical understanding of imperialism, so you know how to stand against capitalist imperialism, which is what we're facing. That's what Israel is a manifestation of. Have that understanding so that you can not be an anti-imperialist in hindsight, but you can be an anti-imperialist when it matters, because it does matter, as we're seeing now. Enough people have educated themselves about the Israel-Palestine conflict to make a real difference and really combat the propaganda. So we need to get, that level of theoretical education and understanding on all issues.
You're absolutely right, brother. I wanted to get at this super chat from Battle Kozaks. Thank you so much again, brother, for the 20 Argentinian dollar super chat. Maybe if Melai goes through with dollarizing Argentina, they'll be U.S. dollars. But what does Nazbol mean? Where does it come from? Well, it's not a history I've dug too deep into, but it comes after the fall of the Soviet Union with the National Bolshevik Party, a party that even in their logo, they were trying to combine the Nazi red flag with the white circle with the hammer and sickle. So it was an attempt at a sort of red-brown alliance, a combination of ideas from Nazi Germany and National Socialism with socialism. And of course, when you try to do that, the substance of socialism is completely removed. But the relevance of the Nazbol term today is that it's used as a way to discredit people who are not willing to cross out, condemn, cancel working class folks that are on the right, that have certain socially conservative views, or people that are willing to, in our age of social media, do the sort of events that give socialistic ideas exposure with crowds that are not used to listening to those ideas, folks perhaps in the conservative right or something. So it's used as a way to cancel people who are not willing to have a purity fetish where they only speak to people that they already agree with, or people who have certain liberal sensibilities on cultural issues.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say too. Is in the West, it's just become an insult. A way to say that you support, a red-brown alliance. And of course, the people who often get called Nazbols are people who would, of course, condemn the Nazbol party and condemn any kind of real red-brown alliance. But if you talk about reaching out to working people, you're going to get accused of supporting a red-brown alliance nowadays, because there are people who legitimately think that pretty much all the workers are fascists. But it's just absurd. So yeah.
You would almost flip it on them, and the people that do hold those positions, since they're actively acting objectively in the interest of imperialism and a rapidly fascistifying American imperialist state, in condemning the people that actually want to reach working people, regardless of their current ideological positions, they're the ones that are in bed with the imperialists, with the right, with the Browns, with the fascists, with the Nazi sympathizers, and it's very clear they're sympathizing with Nazi Israel, carrying forth the genocide. The rate of which they're killing children is quicker than the Nazis in Germany and during the Holocaust, and they're sympathizing with literal Nazis in Ukraine that they've been supporting for 2 years. So if anyone is actually supporting the Red Brown Alliance and acting in ways akin to Nazbol ideology, it's those people who condemn the people that want to incorporate as many working class people into the movement as possible, and in so doing act in the interest of imperialism.
YouTube is gonna have to have a new word on their banned list after this stream.
Fascistifying. That's a great concept.
Monetized.
I'm proud I just developed it here on the spot. But the next story I wanted to cover is a little bit of an emotional one. It's Roger Waters describing in a teary-eyed manner the experience that he's had giving a concert in the West Bank, and how he feels about the plight of the Palestinians and the conditions that they're forced into. And I know that these are sentiments and ways of feeling that I definitely relate to, and that perhaps the vast majority, if not every single one of our viewers does. But let's listen into Roger Waters, someone with tremendous courage, because it's so easy to be silent when you have the positions that he has. But he has the courage to risk getting certain forms of repression. He wasn't able to stay in certain hotels in Argentina and Chile. So let's listen into what he has to say.
Like anybody with a heart, I spend my life teetering on the verge of tears. Because you can't possibly put yourself in that position, in their position, those mothers and fathers, those children, those 2.3 million, well, a bit less now, people living in Gaza, being bombarded by F-16s day and night, week after week after week. One cannot even begin to imagine what it must be like. 2005, I think. The show was sold out, and I cancelled that show, having heard that, Highcombe Park is built on a Palestinian graves and blah, and blah. But I came to some kind of internal compromise because I knew very little about what was going on in Palestine. And I moved the gig to a agricultural community where they grow chickpeas. I went back the next year and went on an extended tour, and we went all over the West Bank, and it was chilling beyond anything that I could ever have imagined to see back then in 2006 what was going on, and the absolute disdain. I remember thinking at the time, if they're like that to me, what must they be like to the Palestinians? And of course we know. And now, to bring it entirely up to date, we know exactly what they're like to the Palestinians, because they are, as we speak, committing genocide in Gaza. It's quite clear to anyone with half a brain that they are committing genocide. I'm happy to say that almost the whole of the rest of the world is going, nada más, stop. No, don't ceasefire for 4 days. You must stop the killing. It has to stop. Clearly, this Zionist experiment in the Holy Land has now officially failed.
Yeah, that's the second celebrity I've heard now saying that their trip to the West Bank turned them against Israel, which is, they do these guided tours to try and indoctrinate people with Zionist propaganda. I know relatives who have gone on them, and it works. But there are keen-eyed celebrities who go and see the apartheid firsthand and see that, as Adam Friedland said, comedian and podcaster, that the Israeli citizens are living in like gated communities in these beautiful homes. It looks like it's Orange County, and the Palestinians are living in slums or living in ghettos. And for me, I obviously sided with the Palestinians originally, but then I was challenged by some Zionists who said, come have a Zoom chat with us. And I sat down on Zoom, me and a good buddy of Carlos and mine, sat down on a Zoom with these IDF members, and I'll never forget
3 years ago, by the way. Yeah.
what.
3 years ago. It wasn't like after. It was for the
Yeah,
yeah.
before we had even started the institute. And the way they talked about Palestinians was insane. They're all terrorists. They want to kill me and my family. I have to get the Arabs before they get me. Blah blah blah. And laughing about killing them and pride and killing Arab people. And it was just disgusting. And it was obvious that they were trying to convince me to support Israel, and what they did was the opposite. But that story is being repeated by a lot of people now. They look at Israel and what they see disgusts them.
Right. Any rational person that listens to Israeli arguments is more likely to be convinced that the Palestinians are right than the Israelis. Very heartwarming a video from Roger Waters, someone who stands consistently on the right side of history, who's been standing with the Palestinians from the start. And just depicting these things that we've been talking about. There's no way that unless you've distorted your humanity to unrecognizable extents, there's no way that you could see what's going on in Gaza and support it. And it's scary because, as we showed in a poll Sunday, 60-something% of Israelis think that their government is not using enough force against the people of Gaza. 37% or 57%, excuse me, 37% think that they're using adequate force, and 1.8%, only 1.8%, are saying that the government is using too much force. That means that there's basically unanimous support for the genocide that's going on in Gaza, with the exception of 2% that maybe would like the genocide to be a little slower. But it's ridiculous. It's been a population that has been indoctrinated, that has been enslaved, and all they've been able to see has been the shadows on the cave. They have a very distorted and upside down view of reality, and they have been deeply dehumanized. And as the quote from Dioniso Yupanqui, you mentioned it earlier, Eddie, no people that oppresses another can themselves be free. In doing this to the Palestinians, as the Socratic tradition teaches us, they are damaging their souls, or damaging their humanity. There's no way that you can be fully human when the premise of your humanity is dehumanizing a group of people and murdering them at the scale at which the Israelis are doing so.
Right. I think anybody who is not supporting Palestine at this point is not even trying to put themselves in the shoes of the Palestinians. They're not even trying. Like, you have, and that applies both to the pro-Israel liberals, like the one I debated, Destiny. He's just like, I'm going to play my video games and enjoy living in America and go on streams and say I'm pro-genocide. Ha ha ha. I'm not even going to try and put myself in their shoes or take this issue seriously or take their suffering seriously. But the Zionists have learned how to do that systematically, right? They've dehumanized the Palestinians systematically, and they've been educated to not see the Palestinians as fully human. So it's almost impossible for them to put themselves in the shoes of the Palestinians, because they've drank the Kool-Aid so much of this Zionist propaganda. And it's disgusting. I mean, there's nothing else to call it except fascism. Like, fascism is a difficult word to define, but like, this is it. Wanting to found an ethno-state, a state within its legal framework, says we want a Jewish majority. The only state in the world that works like that. So explicitly an ethno-state. That is systematically expelling and ethnically cleansing Arab Palestinians. Like, what do you call that other than fascism, when the people of that country are cheering it on? And again, going back to people being anti-imperialist in hindsight, there's all these people who think they would have been against Hitler and fascist Germany. Like, you don't think they had propagandists who were tricking gullible people like you into thinking that Hitler and the Nazis were the good guys? That was what they were really good at. And that's what the fascists are really good at today. And they've got a lot of liberals, less and less, which is good, but they've got a lot of liberals still supporting a fascist ethno state, and it is wild to watch.
Yeah, it's completely abhorrent. The other state that has a similar law to that is Ukraine, another fascist state. Um, the last question that we have here in terms of super chats, we went through all of our stream plan. We got some great interviews in. But the last question that we have is anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism bill is now in effect. Eddie Carlos, Noah Shaw are all anti-Semites according to U.S. law. Be prepared to be canceled. Well, we've been canceled since we've even had the capacity of being canceled. So that's not one of our worries. But this is something scary. We covered it. I covered it, I believe, last week, the first day that the vote came into question, and it's ridiculous that even people who have been leading in terms of elected officials the fight for a ceasefire voted in favor of it, with the exception of Rashida Tlaib, that fucking voted present. The only person that voted against it was a Kentucky Republican, Thomas Massey. But Rashida Tlaib, the reasons why she voted present should make you even angrier, because she voted present basically because the bill doesn't do enough of a good job on presenting the accurate history of the Palestinian people and their right to the land and Israeli occupation, which should be all the more reason for her to vote against it and not present, which is effectively a vote in favor if you really think about it. How can you be neutral on these things? Something very akin to AOC's vote present for the funding of the Iron Dome, and the rest of the squad voted in favor of considering critiques of Zionism to be anti-Semitic. That means that all of the actions that they've had for a ceasefire, all of the whatever even liberal critiques that they've given of the Zionist apartheid occupational force, they're admitting that they cannot defend themselves to be not anti-Semitic by accepting and voting in favor of this bill. So it's a complete disgrace, and it shows the vacillational character, if you wish, of the Social Democrats.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, the bill explicitly says anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. It explicitly says that, which is like, as Battle Cossack is saying, so the U.S. government, the U.S. Congress now considers Noah Krajvik to be anti-Semitic officially. He's a Jewish man. Or Orthodox rabbi. I don't know this guy's first name. Yaakov Shapiro. Orthodox rabbi who believes that Zionism is a perversion of Judaism and opposes Zionism on explicitly religious grounds as a Jewish rabbi. He is anti-Semitic. He is bigoted towards Jewish people, according to the U.S. government. A rabbi, and that we live in a country where 45,000 people are dying every year because they don't have health care. People are drowning in medical debt. They're drowning in student debt. People can't pay their rent. 80% of the country is living paycheck to paycheck. And this is what Congress is doing. Making laws or passing resolutions that declare Jewish rabbis to be anti-Semites. Like, it's beyond parody. But of course, we know as Marxists, our government, and I made this point on TikTok earlier, our government isn't actually a democracy. It's not actually looking out for our best interests. It's a dictatorship of the capitalist class that serves as a tool of suppression, suppressing the speech, suppressing activism, and suppressing any forms of struggle from the bottom up. So although they pretend to be this benevolent organization that's looking out for you, they're exactly the opposite, and it's never been so obvious. And by the way, Representative Thomas Massey then stuck by his guns and tweeted this, which Democrats like Chuck Schumer were melting down about, but getting slammed for doing so. So shout out to Thomas Massey for sticking to his guns here. And I mean, this is about as based as it gets. Congress these days, no American patriotism, but they're all about the Zionism. Needs to be the opposite. Time to invest in the American workers and not send their money towards fascist apartheid states committing genocides abroad.
I couldn't have said it any better myself, brother. That's it's tragic, and you used the word there, parody. It's almost a parody, and I think that um, as the contradictions at the economic base of society intensify, the ideological contradictions are going to show themselves in more forms that are very evidently laughable and parody like. But with that, we have been able to go over the whole stream plan for the day, discuss a wide array of important current events. I want to remind you all that the Midwestern Marx Institute is grassroots funded, so consider becoming a patron if you want to support us financially at patreon.com/MidwesternMarx. If you become a $10 member, you get a free ebook copy of The Purity, Fetish, and the Crisis of Western Marxism. As soon as you sign up, you can sign up for $1 a month. You get the link to our Midwestern Marx Institute Discord, where you can recommend stuff for us to react to, amongst other things. You could always also become a YouTube member and do other things to support us financially, buy some of the Midwestern Marx gear, buy some of our books. But thank you to all of you for watching. Thank you, Eddie, for joining us. I know you've had a very tight and busy schedule. Thank you for making time. Thank you to the guests who have now, of course, left. Thank you to Battle Kozaks for quite a few super chats. And thank you, of course, to the Institute's official sugar daddy, Ross Ian Cole, for the €20 super chat. Thank you, all of you, for watching and for sharing our content and liking it and for supporting the People's Institute, the Midwestern Marx Institute. We will have tomorrow the first ever live stream in Spanish. Danny Shaw is going to be interviewing I believe, Argentinian economist. Don't quote me on the nationality part of it, but someone who's absolutely brilliant. And then Saturday morning, Noah and myself will represent the Institute in a panel discussion hosted by the International Manifesto Group on the fateful divorce of the intellectuals and the working class, which we'll hear from the likes of folks like Radhika Desai, Gabriel Rockhill, and others. So look out for all of those things. Look out for some of our upcoming book projects, and you can keep up with all that at MidwesternMarx.com. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Eddie, for coming on. And with that, we'll roll out, as we always roll in, with the glorious and marvelous International.